Welcome to my last tour of conference. I'm sort of nostalgic. It's been a ride, and it's been a wonderful experience, and I appreciate all the kindness and warm fuzzies. So, where did Jim Ward start? Jim Ward was born in a little town in Oklahoma, rural Oklahoma, on the west side of the state. The little birth town was called Elk City. You may find it on the map. It's probably just a little dot. I did not grow up there. That's where I was born. My mother had grown up a little town called Leedy, about 45 miles north of that. And 45 miles north of Leedy is a town called Woodward, and that's where I grew up. It's getting close to the Oklahoma Panhandle, but in that part of the state. I was born in 1941, about 6 months roughly before Pearl Harbor and the beginning of World War II. Oklahoma, especially rural Oklahoma, and I don't mean this is in any derogatory way. Rural communities are not exactly the best, most conducive environments for anybody who's different. And I'm gonna be honest, I was different. I am different. I was the typical, nerdy kid in school, the one that didn't care about sports or, all of the other stuff that most kids care about. I liked music. I was passionate about music. I'd listen to the Metropolitan Opera on the Saturday afternoon broadcast, which I'm surprised that it even got broadcast in Oklahoma, but Texaco had a nationwide hookup, and there it was. I loved it. I loved all kinds of, especially classical music. Listened to some of the other stuff that was on the radio in those days, but that was my passion. And it was not exactly a great environment, as I say, for a kid growing up, especially one who didn't quite fit in. I was going to be one of those kids that grew up to be gay, although who would know, in those days, there was no talk about those things. My parents were quite religious. They were Presbyterians. I was raised in the Presbyterian church and grew up there all the way. I'm sorry. I'm a little frazzled, so if I stumble some, you'll hopefully forgive me. And there's a lot of, I'm trying to find out who I am, and I have kind of a convoluted path growing up. So I'm kind of back and forth between places and towns and trying different things. My dad at this point in my life in Oklahoma was working as an auto mechanic. And he and I think I got a lot of my dad. He was also one of these people who was always tinkering, always finding solutions to problems. MacGyver hadn't happened that early, but we were kind of MacGyver-esque, is that a word? Trying to figure things out, crafting things, building things. My dad was a good auto mechanic, I'm quite certain, but he wanted more for himself and his family. So when I was 11, just in time for me to hit puberty, we pulled up stakes and moved to a town called Colorado Springs. Oklahoma schools had no culture, the town had no culture, and it was something that I missed a great deal. It was a cultural desert. But Colorado Springs was like an oasis. The school system was amazing. Music was something that happened in the schools. I was able at 11 to start studying the violin privately during school. I had private lessons in the school, in a schoolroom. That was 6th grade. In 7th grade, when I began junior high, it offered a choir, it offered a youth orchestra, all kinds of music classes and art classes. I also, in addition to being passionate about music, I also loved to draw and paint and doodle, and I also adored all kinds of crafts, making things, building things, doing things with my hands. So we moved to Colorado, and as I said, it was kind of an oasis. We've become very affiliated with the First Presbyterian Church in Colorado Springs, and I'm having a lot of difficulty with the subject of sex. You know, here I'm in, you know, all of those hormones that happen to us in puberty, and not knowing anything about it because it's not something that my family ever discussed. So I finally got up the courage to go and talk to the church's youth minister, Reverend Bill Tatum. He's not in the timeline. By the way, check out the timeline. I encourage you. This is your final opportunity before, close up the exhibit tonight. But at any rate, I have some consultation with Reverend Bill, who's very sympathetic and explains to me the facts of life. And not that long afterwards, I have my first sexual encounter. And who with? Reverend Bill. Now, I'm not of legal age yet, so I know this sounds shocking. I know this sounds like child abuse, which technically it was. But I was a horny teenage kid, and I welcomed the advances. But, you know, I don't want to give you the wrong idea. This is not something I support at all, but in my own personal case, you know, I feel kind of conflicted. I welcomed his advances, although it never really went very far. It involved a little bit of heavy petting after church one Sunday evening, and the lights have largely gone out and there's nobody else around. That was the extent of that. But it wasn't too long afterwards that I had my first sexual encounter with another human being, who happened to be my best friend David from high school. So I guess in a sense that was kind of consensual. I'm getting older. I'm reaching graduation from high school, and it's at that point of, you know, what am I going to do with my life? What kind of a career am I going to follow? Well, I was just absolutely passionate about music, and I wanted to become a professional musician. So I applied for and obtained a scholarship to the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. They actually gave me a $500 scholarship, which was kind of remarkable when I think about it. So off I go to Rochester, and it's kind of the first time that I've been to a much bigger city. It was a miserable year. The weather was horrible. The dean of the school was a homophobe, and She had an elaborate spy network and was informed of everything that went on. And I got called on the carpet a number of times and accused of a few things, and I just looked at her in the eye and said, I don't know what you're talking about. And it was my word against whoever's, and nothing ever happened, but I was certain that by the end of the school year, I was not going to be invited back. And I realized that I was not sufficiently gifted, musically speaking, to be a professional musician. The best I could have hoped for would maybe be a chair in some small town orchestra and spend the rest of my life as a teacher. I was not cut out to be a teacher teaching violin in some small town. So what do I do? You know, it's the end of the school year. I've got up to be a little bit practical and think, well, to make a living, maybe I'll pursue a career as an interior designer. I have had some sexual experience, not just with David. I've met some people, some adults in the Colorado Springs gay community. That's kind of, I think, how I first got the interior design idea. There was a gay designer in the city that was connected with some of the people that I know. But at any rate, I decided to go off to New York on a big adventure and study interior design. I was good at design. I was good at drawing. There are two renderings here that I did while I was at the at the New York School. And I could have been a designer, I suppose. I could have pursued it, but it would not have been a good fit. I came to realize that interior designers who make it have to be rather ruthless. They also have to be father confessor or mother confessor. They have to be hand holder. They have to be psychiatrist. They have to be bullshitter, you know. And you have to cater to a lot of rich neurotics. It's just that simple. And I just did not have the temperament to do it. Paul has told me rather recently that the interior designers who really make it are the ones who have come from rich backgrounds already and who understand, you know, that class. I obviously did not come from there, and it was obviously not a good fit. So what do I do next? I've been in the New York School of Interior Design for a school year, and I decide, well, I'll go back to Colorado. I'll go to the University of Colorado in Boulder, and I'll major in fine art and minor in music, in harp. That was one of the lovely things, at least from Eastman School. I had started studying the harp and become quite passionate about it, and have played the harp ever since for my own amusement. I'm not terribly good at it, but it has given me a lot of enjoyment. So I was able to minor in harp at the University of Colorado. Sadly, I'm afraid that the exhibit is not always chronological. My life doesn't feel like it's chronological either, but we'll be kind of jumping back and forth, and I hope you can follow me. Not just physically, but follow me as I try and tell this story. At any rate, I finish up my school year at the Interior Design School. I go to the University of Colorado. I think I only spent one semester there. I can't recall whether it was a semester or a full year. I think it was just one semester, and then decided to go back to New York and finish up my study there. So that was a one semester at the Interior Design School. all right, I'm in New York now, and I'm done with school. So, but I'm still living in New York, and I decided to get a series of jobs over the next few years, design related. I remember working for a company that designed and sold custom floors to decorators. The one that I remember most was this god-awful place. It was kind of fun though. They did wall groupings for designers, and their clientele was abysmal. It was just people with too much money who wanted rather, they didn't really care what the end result was as long as there was something there for their friends and families to see. But at any rate, I am living in I have moved to Brooklyn Heights. I've been, when I was in school, I was in an apartment in New York City, in Manhattan, and then I'd moved to Brooklyn Heights, which was a gay neighborhood largely. I was living in a brownstone down at the foot of Girolamo Street, an old brownstone that was inhabited by a lot of gay men and was lovingly known by the locals as Vaseline Flats, if you get the reference. Up the street from Vaseline Flats, a block away, there was a Brooklyn neighborhood house. And this was just a brownstone building. It happened to have a gym for the kids to play basketball after school, and a number of classrooms where they could do various classes for adults and kids. And one day I'm walking by and they've got a poster in the outside for a jewelry making class, and I thought, oh, that sounds like great fun. So I sign up for their jewelry making class. It takes there are several installments, and I got started with making jewelry. As it happens, in this display case, you will see one of the first pieces of jewelry I made. It's a little violin pen. I made it while I was doing this jewelry class, and it was a pen I made for my mother. So I wanted to send a Christmas card out that year, and I had this bright idea of creating a silkscreen. I started to do silkscreen prints. So I did this print for my Christmas card that year. It was 1968. It's called Brotherhood. It's hanging upside down, but it hopefully conveys the message of how interlocking people of different ethnicities can exist together. There's this sense of togetherness. That I sent out in '68. The following year, I recreated it in a different set of colors and sent that one out as well. Well, I had this idea of this whole series of what I called my puzzle people, and in my final years in Colorado, I did some, and then I pursued some more after I moved back to Colorado. While I was in these last phases in New York, I met a guy named Fred who was into metaphysics, and so I was intrigued. I had a terrible crush on him, which he did not reciprocate, but that's another story. At any rate, he introduced me told me all about an organization called the Order of the Golden Dawn. And I don't know if any of you ever heard of it, but it was an offshoot of the Masons. And where the Masons were all about men, the Golden Dawn was initiated both men and women. So he also introduced me to another organization. The Golden Dawn was no longer in existence at that time. He introduced me to another organization called the Builders of the Atom, which was a California organization that published a correspondence course on Tarot, and he encouraged me to take it because he felt it would be particularly educational for my magical, metaphysical interests. I did so subsequently, and the BOTA has their own tarot deck, and when you do their correspondence course, they send you this deck of blank cards, black and white cards that you color yourself, and they include a little booklet with what color goes where. It's a little paint by number. That deck is in the case over here. One of the people in the Golden Dawn who I suspect most of you have heard of was a man named Aleister Crowley. He was apparently quite a rogue. He was openly bisexual, and the organization was not particularly, this is Victorian England, and they were a bit still prudish at that time, and so they kicked him out, and he went out and did what Aleister Crowley did. One of the books that he published was a reference called 777, which is nothing more than a bunch of lists, essentially, of correspondences between all kinds of metaphysical things like planets and astrological signs and grades of the lodge. There were also some tables of colors and how they correspond with themes of not only planetary but also astrological, and various and sundry things related to those. That's a long-winded way of telling you about this series of my puzzle people, because the colors that I chose for these were pulled from those color tables in 777. Here are some photos. Why they're exactly here, I don't know, of me playing my harp. This one you, I'm sure, have seen many times. It's a favorite. It's my artist statement and some information about me and my passion for music. And this is an early photo of me playing my harp, the year I graduated, not graduated, but the year after I left Eastman. This corner, these objects date mostly from my time at the University of Colorado. I took a sculpture class, and one of the class projects was sculpting in modeling clay a man who was the model for the class that day. And then the next assignment was to recreate this model in whatever way we felt like we wanted to interpret him. And my interpretation was this figure made from flatware. I stole some of it from the restaurant I was working in as a busboy, and some of it I bought from a local thrift store. The base is actually an antique hot plate. I've never seen another one like it. It's a terrible thing to do to an antique hot plate. And the glass dome is a wire sculpture that I did. It's not my best effort, but Paul wanted it as part of the exhibit, so I present it to you for your interest. On this table is a photograph, or three photographs. The one in front is a sculpture I did in clear resin. This was actually dates from quite a bit later, but he lists it in 1964, which is not accurate. At any rate, it has not survived. It got broken, and that was the end of it. This is another sculpture, photos of another sculpture I did when I was in sculpture class. It's sheet metal, and was roughly this wide, this deep, and so high. It was the metal was painted black and with yellow stripes. Kind of changing locale again. And after I have gone to New York, moved to New York after the university, I took one of my design-related jobs was home furnishing display at Gimbel's department store. How many of you remember Gimbel's, if at all? It was a competitor of Macy's. And at any rate, I got this job. I lasted at it for 6 months before the head of the interior design department decided that he didn't like me and got me fired. I needed a sculpture, or needed some kind of focus for this room that I had designed. And I decided, well, I will, under an assumed name, I will sell them my sheet metal sculpture. I changed the stripes from yellow to white and put it in the room. Somehow, magically, this newspaper clipping has survived a photograph of that room display that I did, including this sculpture. So check it out. We go this way. There's still a little bit of art to visit. Some more of my silk screen prints, and this giant painting that I did. This was done while I was still in New York. It was influenced by a German artist named Joseph Albers. He wrote a book called The Interaction of Color, and he talks at great length about how colors react to one another. If you study this painting, you will assume that the two triangles are different colors, but they aren't. They're exactly the same color, but because of their backgrounds, they appear different. I titled this piece Counterpoint. So, we are back in New York for the moment. That we have reached a pivotal point in my life. I have been all this time trying to find my career path, to find out who I am as a person. What is it that makes me me? And this is one of the critical points in my life. One of the two most critical points in my life. In Brooklyn Heights, I don't remember the street it was on, one of the main little thoroughfares there in Brooklyn Heights, there was a little bookstore, and it was owned by two gay guys who turned out to be two gay leather guys. And they introduced me to the gay leather scene in New York. And it was one of those magical fits. It was I just slipped into it like it was made for me. It fit. It changed my life. I knew really at that point who I was. And I knew that this was where I was going from here somewhere, but I knew that this was a jumping off point. I joined, thanks to the two guys were named Steve and Mark, and thanks to them, I joined the New York Motorbike Club, which was a gay leather club. There's a photo of me in my leather finery.
How many motorcycles were in the club? Did you ride motorcycles, or?
Some of the guys did. It wasn't a requirement, but a lot of the guys did. It was a name. I don't know. I don't know how many of them actually had motorbikes in New York anyway. It's not exactly a conducive environment. But while I'm there, I'm at this point in my life, magically, I say this magically, fatefully, something crosses my path. It's a magazine. I don't remember the name of it. I don't know how it came to me, but it had an article about a wealthy guy who gets on his yacht and circumnavigates the globe. And when he gets home, he decides to have an ear pierced. As you probably all know, this is actually a naval tradition with a number of variations in terms of what kind of voyage and what kind of piercing, but at any rate, it is a tradition. Well, this kind of sparked something in my psyche, and I wanted my own ear pierced. And one of my buddies in the New York Motorbike Club was a guy named Ron, who had been a merchant seaman. He had lots of tattoos. He had tattoos on his earlobes with ear piercings in the centers of these stars on his ears. So he came to my apartment at some point and he pierced my ear for me. And I was happy about it. I thought, well, it's probably a little bit much to wear to work, but I'll put a Band-Aid over it, and if anybody asks, I'll just say I cut myself shaving. Nobody asked. So I healed my ear piercing, and this fantasy kind of took root. Well, I enjoy nipple play. I've been enjoying nipple play for some time now. Would not that be even more erotic if I pierced my nipples? At this point, I'd never heard of such a thing, but it was a compulsion that I could not get away from. I had an ex-lover who had an apartment, a different apartment in Vaseline Flats, who, although we were exes, we were still good friends, and he had a little kit of watchmaking tools. He was a watchmaker. And in that kit, there was a spool of gold wire. And it was very thin. It was probably 20 gauge, maybe even 22 gauge. Way too thin, but at this point, who knew any better? So I stole a little bit of it, and I made two little, to call them rings is kind of a stretch, but ring-shaped objects. And so I got up the nerve one weekend. I soak a wine bottle cork and a push pin and the rings in a little alcohol, and I pierce my nipples. And I'm sure you all have had the experience of dropping the transfer, losing the transfer. Well, it's that experience, only worse. When you take the push pin out and you try and fish these little wires through. I managed, and then I freaked out. Took them out. But it was one of those things that would not go away. It just kept nagging at my brain. And so not too long afterwards, I redid the piercings, went through it all over again, and left the rings in place. Those piercings healed. I had them for many years until I developed Kaposi sarcoma in the 90s and needed chemotherapy. And at that point, even those piercings had been well established for decades. All of a sudden, they started to weep, and I was not ready to deal with them at that point, so I took the jewelry out, and they closed up overnight, and I was never able to get the jewelry back in. But that's a totally different story. When I had been at the University of Colorado, I had carried on an affair with a guy named Bud. He lived in Denver, and we had an on and off relationship. I was in Boulder, so it wasn't really conducive to, being together all the time, and it was okay. But on some weekend, my buddy's Steve and Mark had gone to one of the local gay bars, little gay leather bars, and picked up a guy, took him home. His name was, turns out it was my buddy Bud. I'm kind of getting a little out of sequence here. I've now got my nipples pierced, and I have being very closeted about it, feeling like a freak and weird, and obviously nobody else has ever done this. And lo and behold, I'm at this local gay leather bar at the foot of Christopher Street in the Village, and they've got this light over the bar, and standing under it is this hunk, bare-chested, with gold rings in his nipples. His name was Fernando. He was something of a local legend. I never had any real experience with Fernando. I did kind of get to meet him socially sometime later, significantly later actually, after I moved to California. But at any rate, he was the person who made me realize that I was not as wrong as I thought I was. I was not the only one who had this fantasy. So, lo and behold, Steve and Mark have picked Bud up, who's there on vacation, and by accident, we were all run in together, and I reconnect with Bud. We kind of picked up where we left off. And by the time he's ready to go home, he says, "Oh, please move back to Denver." So I said, "Okay." And so I pull up stakes and move back to Denver. Come on around, folks. We are now getting close to the pivotal, the other place where things start coming together. When I was in Denver, towards the end, I had a buddy named Victor, and we were both in an encounter group. How many of you know what an encounter group is? It was a form of group therapy where a bunch of people get together and talk about their issues. There's usually a therapist who moderates. So Victor and I are together in this group, and he says, "Oh, I read this really remarkable book called The Primal Scream by Arthur Janoff, and it's just amazing." And I happened to see a copy in the bookstore one day, and I picked it up and read it. And good old Dr. Janoff says, "Oh, my primal therapy will cure whatever ails you, including homosexuality." Now, at this point in my life, I have zero issue with my sexuality. However, I have had a lifetime of depression, and I thought, well, I would like to do primal therapy and see if it will help me with my depression. If my sexuality happens to change, which I cannot envision, then so be it, but that's not why I would do it. So I went into primal therapy. I was there for almost 2 years, and after a year and a half, I sort of came out of the therapy mind frame and started getting back into life. And that brings us to 1975, which Paul calls kind of the year. So, while I was in Colorado, belonged to the New York, or to the local motorcycle club in Denver. It was a club called the Rocky Mountaineers. And one of the other guys in the club was a guy named Rod. He was at the time that I first met him, he was married, had several grown children, but he was a gay man, and a gay man of that generation. Many of them married and had kids because it was what was expected. He had reached a point in his life where he said, I'm done, my kids are grown, and I'm going to leave for California to live my gay life, which is what he did. He got on his Harley. Here's a picture of him on his Harley, and took off for California. So I find myself in Los Angeles. We're both in LA at the same time. I'm wrapping up therapy. He is driving a bus, and his route is from downtown, between Hollywood and downtown LA. And it's his regular route. He picks up this guy, Tom, on a regular basis, and Tom works at the downtown library. And very often Tom will sit behind the driver and they'll chat during the commute. And one of these excursions from Hollywood to downtown, a guy gets on the bus and he has an ear piercing. So their conversation that day turns to the subject of piercing, and Rod says, "Oh, I've got this buddy who's got pierced nipples." And Tom's immediate reaction is, "I would really like to meet him." Well, I do meet Tom. I go to his apartment, and he shows me a whole lot of photographs, rather remarkable photographs, which I'm sure all of you have seen, believe it or not, because they are photographs of this man, who at the time was known as Roland Loomis. You know him now as Fakir Mushafar. Tom also had a lot of correspondence from various and sundry piercing enthusiasts from all over. And Tom also knew this man over here, Doug Malloy, who also lived in Los Angeles. So, at any rate, at this time I am dating a guy named Eric. He lives in San Francisco and he comes to LA periodically. We have this kind of back and forth relationship for a bit. And Eric wants me to pierce his nipples. Now I know that there's got to be a better way than a way I pierced my own. And I've learned from Tom that Doug Malloy has some experience and presumably knows what he's doing. And whatever it is, it's got to be better than mine. So I asked Tom if he'll put me in contact with Doug, which he does. And so I contact Doug and I say, "Hey, my boyfriend wants his nipples pierced. Can you teach me how to do it? Can you show me how it's done, how it should be done right? Also, can you tell me where I can get some jewelry?" Now, in addition to that jewelry making course that I took in New York, my watchmaker lover had introduced me to a class for professional jewelry making, which I took also. And at this point in my life, I've got 2 courses of jewelry making under my belt. I kind of know my way around it. I may not be up to the professional level, but I can come up with something. Doug says, "I'm happy to teach you what I know about doing piercing, but if you want jewelry, the best I can do is to refer you to this guy in San Diego who'll make rings for you for $200 each." Someone here figured out that that's over $1,000 in today's money. I said, no, that's not going to happen. So I went to a lapidary shop in Hollywood, and I bought a couple of pieces of gold wire. I bought a Burns-O-Matic propane torch and a few other tools and supplies, and I went back to my little house and I made jewelry for my boyfriend. Doug and I had come to speculate that something straight through the piercing might actually heal better than something curved like a ring. So my first jewelry design, very first original Jim Ward jewelry design, is what I ended up calling a nipple retainer. And there's a photograph of it way at the end of the exhibit. It consists of a straight post that's kind of hinged on one end, and there's a ring that goes through it. On the opposite side is a little catch that I designed. So the bar goes through the piercing and comes around and clips in on the opposite side. So you've got this straight bar through the piercing that's held in place by this ring that goes around the nipple. That's my original design. Doug comes over, we do my boyfriend's piercings. All goes reasonably well, all things considering Doug's technique at that time, which was still pretty primitive. Also, at this time, when I first meet Doug the first time, thanks to Tom, he is in the company of a man named Alan Oversby, not on this banner, Alan Oversby, also known as Mr. Sebastian. It's the first and of only 2 times that I actually met Mr. Sebastian. This was the first time. Any rate, moving along, come on in. Doug calls me up. I've done Eric's piercings, nipple piercings, and Doug calls me up soon after, and he says, let's go have lunch. There was a favorite little restaurant called the Red Room that we went to, little Swedish place. And we're having our meal, and Doug says to me, you know how to make jewelry. I can teach you how to pierce. I think you should start a business. There is definitely a market for this. I said, I have done a lot of corresponding with piercing enthusiasts from all over. I've also put ads in the local gay rags trying to meet gay guys who are interested in piercing. I've got this list of about 100 names I think we can use to start out with mail order and start to grow a business, and I'm even willing to finance it. Doug was a millionaire. He had a degree in electrical engineering, some patents. He worked related to the film industry, and he had a license for the southwestern corner of the United States for the Muzak Corporation. And I suspect most of you are too young to have any exposure to Muzak, but it was lovingly known as elevator music. They took all of these popular tunes and they watered them down and they played them in the background on elevators, restaurants, doctor's office, dentist's office, wherever you went. There was Muzak. He made a lot of money. He was well-to-do, and he lent me a little bit of money to get Gauntlet started. So, what do we call it? What do we call this business? It hasn't become Gauntlet yet. Doug has some ideas, some mythological possibilities. Saint Sebastian came into the conversation, and I wasn't particularly impressed with any of those. At that time, previously, I'm not sure at what point, I had made a wide leather watch band. It must have been 3 or 4 inches wide. There was a row of pyramid studs on each edge. And one night I'm sitting on the couch watching TV. I take the watch band, the watch off, and set it on the end table. And at I turn around, I look, and I see that watch with the watch band, and it comes to me full-blown Gauntlet. And the associations of the word gauntlet. In English, we have 2 phrases: to throw down the gauntlet, which is the challenge, and to run the gauntlet, which is an ordeal. And as far as I'm concerned, starting a business in particular is both of those things. It is definitely a challenge, and it can be very much an ordeal. Hopefully, it doesn't stay that way, but it is. So it was Gauntlet. There was no doubt in my mind, and I told Doug what my choice was, and he was fine with it. So in November of 1975, I went to a newspaper office. I filled out the form and placed ads in the newspaper saying Jim Ward, or James Ward, is doing business as Gauntlet Enterprises. So Gauntlet was born in November and is a Scorpio. One of the things that we decided to do to build up the local build up business locally, was through these gay men that Doug had connected with. And we started a group. He suggested at first the Society of St. Sebastian. For whatever reason, he was obsessed. I said, no, that's too much. Let's just call it the Tattoo and Piercing Group, or T&P Group for short. The T&P Group would get together about once a month, and we'd do a potluck, or we'd go to a restaurant for a banquet. And then afterwards, we'd adjourn to somebody's house or stay at somebody's house if it was a potluck. And after we'd fed and had a few drinks, no doubt, which was maybe not, I shouldn't say that, that's not cool. But I would pierce whoever was interested. And it got the ball rolling. I have designed a little brochure, which you'll see a couple of examples, one folded up where you can't see the inside, and on one of the banners, one of the posters, there's an unfolded version that shows my little drawings of my initial offerings of jewelry. So this little brochure I am mailing out, and I'm starting to do mail orders. I'm starting to get correspondence from people, which leads us to the next phase, which is the magazine. I started getting all of these letters from people with two common questions. How do I pierce my girlfriend, boyfriend, this part of their body? And this is the day before computers and the internet, and I got tired of typing letters to people saying, this is how we do this. I'd rather not tell you in a letter. But they also wanted to know how they could meet other people who were interested in piercing. At this point in time, piercing is very closeted. There's no way you're going to get pierced professionally. People are doing it in their garage, they're, behind closed doors with the curtains closed. So it became apparent to me that the simplest way to address this particular issue was to start a magazine. I could publish articles on how I was doing the piercings themselves, and also include a sheet of classified ads inside the magazine for those magazines that went to subscribers. So that's what I did. The first issue came out in October of 1977. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try and rush through this, and I'm sorry with it. We're down to kind of the last of our time with this exhibit. On this other wall, opposite wall here, is what may be the largest collection in the world of the artwork of Bud Larson, a gay artist in LA, who I commissioned to do almost all of these drawings for PFIQ. 14 of them were the front covers of the magazine, and a lot of the rest of them appeared inside the pages of some of the other issues. I want to talk briefly about tattoo conventions, which also played a part. Actually, I don't know whether I would do or not. We don't have a lot of time. Let me just say that I did take a table at the 1977 Reno Tattoo Convention. I had a vending space. I did piercing in my hotel room. I did a demonstration on the floor, and I thought we were well received. It was also the prime premiere of Fakir Mushafar, who did a performance, a sideshow performance at the final banquet, and was thenceforth known as Fakir. Tattoo Sammy and his wife were there. We got a good reception, but Don Ed Hardy, who had received the Tattoo Artist of the Year award, and was not impressed. He was very, very unimpressed, and he gathered enough support to ban body piercing from future conventions, tattoo conventions. They eventually sent out, I think it came with the form to apply for a vendor space the next year, and it said, there was a space down at the bottom where it said that ITAA, the tattoo organization, will not rent vending space for body piercing or anything else, and this is a quote, that gives tattooing a bad name. Of course, nothing about all of those scratchers and bad tattooists and bad tattoo enthusiasts, and any rate. So that was kind of the disconnect as far as I was concerned. Doug did encourage me to go to the convention in 78, where we did not have vending space, but we did talk a lot to other people, to attendees, about what we did. I won't go into detail on that because we do have a shortage of time. Speaking of Fakir, when I first met him back in 1975 or thereabouts, he was not very impressed with me. My whole primary interest, especially in those days, was about body piercing as a means of sexual enhancement. That little piece of metal strategically placed in a body can greatly add to your sexual enjoyment. And Fakir was not amused because I was not spiritual enough. Body piercing needed to have a spiritual aspect. And I thought, well, I don't see this as a problem. If you want it to be a spiritual experience, you can make it a spiritual experience. So I'm fine with it, and we make nice with one another, and we become good friends for a number of years. I do some rituals with Fakir. He starts to contribute articles to PFIQ. And we come to a film that we did together in 1987 called Dances Sacred and Profane. It was made by two brothers, the Jury brothers. It started out as a documentary about Charles Gatewood, the photographer, the well-known photographer. Somewhere along the line, they have filmed Charles at Mardi Gras doing crazy things that people often do at Mardi Gras. And Charles introduces them to Fakir, who steals the show. And suddenly the focus of the documentary shifts from Charles to Fakir. Well, the filmmakers put their heads together with Fakir, and it's decided that they want to film some Native American style rituals in a traditional setting. So we all get together in Wyoming, and they film the 2 rituals that Fakir and I did. I participated in a tearing of flesh and assisted in a hook hanging. The film took a while to get finished because they had to raise funds to do the final cut and get it released. It was not ever particularly successful. The title I gave to the film, actually. After the filming was complete, we went back to the hotel, had dinner, and the subject of what do we call this film came up. And as I told you, I had studied harp. And there's a very famous piece, you ought to look it up and listen sometime. There's a famous piece for harp called Dances Sacred and Profane. I said, this expresses what my concept of what this film is about. And the filmmakers agreed and titled it that way. As I say, it did not get great distribution and eventually got picked up by a video company and retitled Bizarre Rituals. These were the days of video rentals, so I suspect a lot of people may have seen it at that time under that title. Eventually, the Jury Brothers, I heard back from them, and they had released it on DVD. Then they kind of disappeared, and I have no idea what happened to them. Fakir bought the last 400 copies of the DVD and subsequently sold some and gave some away. I was told by someone who attended one of my earlier tours that video, the video under its original title, is on YouTube. So we'll move into this gallery. On the right here are banners of a number of the original piercing pioneers, and I encourage you to spend a little time looking at them. I can't begin to enumerate all of these individuals. On the other wall, the opposite wall, are the covers of all of the first 50 issues. I say the first 50 because the last issue dates from, what, 1990? Yikes. Oh no.
Pictures alive?
Be careful, don't cut yourself. Any rate, there's a whole history of kind of a evolution of the magazine. The first 14 issue covers were by Bud, and he's popping up, inside the magazine for quite a few of the other issues. With 25, I commissioned him to design little side panels for to go beside the photographs. We started color with issue 15. It was only on the front and back cover and the centerfold. That's how we were able to afford to print it. And that was the situation all the way through issue 50. As you know, I trust you know, there were 50, and there's now an issue 51, which was not completed in 1997 because we ran out of money and Gauntlet was in the process of going under. So, any rate, additional pioneers here. This would have been nice to have probably earlier in the exhibit, but these are all of the Gauntlet catalogs, including this first one that has the drawings in it. There's a price list here with this crazy formula I put together to calculate the price of your jewelry when the price of gold was going nuts. I had a customer who begged me to do a magazine binder so he could put all of his magazines together as a collection. Eventually, after he nagged me for months, I found us a place to make these purple velour binders with the gold stamp on the front. All right. At any rate, over here are some of the subjects who appeared in PFIQ by various photographers. We had, I don't remember where Paul put the list of photographers, but it's here somewhere.
They're on the PFIQ wall on this side.
All right, good. And then there is this rogues gallery here. You might recognize this man. This banner actually probably should have gone earlier in the chronology. Gauntlet opened I started Gauntlet in my funky little house in West Hollywood. As I said, it was mail order, and I was doing piercings, the T&P group, and I was also getting drunks in the middle of the night, knocking on my front door, wanting to get pierced. And I knew that if I was ever going to have any legitimacy, and I was going to grow this business, I'd have to have a storefront, which I eventually did, right on Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood. And I opened the store in 1978. Over the years, we eventually had 4 shops and a franchise in Paris, France. The second one was in San Francisco, then in New York, and finally in Seattle. At any rate. And piercing blows up. 1989 is kind of a key year. The book, Modern Primitives, comes out. Paul does the Aerosmith video, Crying, piercing Alicia Silverstone's navel, allegedly. She had a stand-in. And piercing goes nuts. Everybody and his brother or sister decides they can make a quick buck by opening a piercing studio. Doesn't matter whether you know what the F they're doing, but you can make a buck. The tattooists who have previously wanted nothing to do with us suddenly see dollar signs and start offering piercing services. So it really just goes nuts. Fakir and I have unfortunately split by that time. He starts to offer piercing seminars. And he and I kind of tangle over it, not because I resented him doing it, but he's giving these people who take his weekend seminar a certificate, leading them to believe that all they need now that they've got this weekend seminar and this certificate, they are now qualified to go out and open a shop. I said, this is irresponsible, it's dangerous, you should not do this. He backed down, thankfully, and did not continue to do that, but I also figured, well, maybe Gauntlet should do its own seminars. So that is what we proceeded to do. And that brings me over here to another one of the banners. This is the banner for Michaela Gray, and I want to particularly point it out because Michaela has been a great influence and has done a great deal for our industry. I met her first in New York when I was doing some what I call piercing clinics. They were guest spots at a leather shop in Manhattan. She was very enthusiastic. She moved to California because she wanted to get more involved with piercing. She took a job at the San Francisco store, and it was not a harmonious fit for her. So I took her on as my assistant at the corporate office. I was pretty much removed from actually piercing in the shop very often. I was mostly working on the magazine and various and sundry other projects. Michaela helped me get the seminars going. She and I co-wrote the manual. We have reprinted it and it's available. It's called Responsible Body Piercing. She is also the primary person responsible for founding APP. She spearheaded the effort and Gauntlet funded her, which is probably why it happened. I think an individual who had tried to do it without financial support would have had a very difficult time. She gathered together a handful of studio owners. You'll see, I'm sure you've seen the photo of founders. We got together and some of them stayed, some of them went, but they formed the core group that started this organization. You owe Michaela a great debt of gratitude for that. Sadly, she is no longer involved with the industry. She's extremely bitter. She was driven away in no small part by Shannon Larrett. They clashed early on and he just went out of his way to alienate her to the point that she just walked away. But at any rate, we are here because, in no small part, because of Michaela. We'll wrap up, I guess, over here. This is my original jeweler's bench that I built in 1975 because I didn't want to spend the money for a manufactured one. It's scrap lumber and parts of a packing crate. And I warn you, if you get too close to it, you're likely to get splinters. I'll talk to you about some of my personal jewelry innovations and some of my personal tool innovations. Here is my first catalog with my little sketches. This is my nipple retainer that I talked to you about earlier. You can actually see the first one had a little hinge here. Subsequently, I used thicker wire and drilled through it rather than make a hinge. The nipple shield that Janet Jackson flashed to the nation and to the world was also one of my original creations. I am responsible for introducing niobium piercing jewelry, and I also invented the septum retainer. Oh, why, thank you, Nick. For the innovations tool-wise, the piercing needle. In Doug's kit,
And fell asleep.
in Doug's kit, there was an assortment of veterinarian hypodermic needles with the hubs still attached. So it became, well, when the first failure, the kit included also an ear piercer, which was something he was using for nipple piercing. And it works up to a point. That point being, you run into that nipple that's tougher than boot leather. After the failure of that one, a serious failure of the ear piercing tool, I decided it's time to go to the hypodermic needles. And that proves to be a bit of a challenge because trying to follow the bevel through with the jewelry does not work really very well. And finally it just, why the heck are we doing this? So I just slice off the hub of and clean it up, sterilize it, and voila, you have a piercing needle. They're not great, I'm telling you, because I'm buying them from a medical supply house in New York. The quality is inconsistent. Some of them are not very sharp, and we are reusing them. And before you are aghast, doctors were reusing needles. It was common practice. You would clean the damn needles, you would rebag them, re-sterilize them, and use them all over again. So we were not doing anything that the medical profession was doing. As I said, they were also very dull. They got particularly dull. Some of them were dull to start with. I remember some of those. So they were hard to get through tissue. And we tried various and sundry solutions to that problem. Putting a Band-Aid around your finger. I remember using a thimble, or trying to use a thimble. It was awkward. And eventually we came up with the needle holder. These plexiglass discs drilled to hold a needle. And they made it a lot easier. Now, as far as the piercing needle is concerned, when the AIDS epidemic hit, it became apparent that we had to stop what we were doing. It was time to go to disposable. We had to adapt to using gloves. I mean, before that, doctors and dentists, tattooists didn't use gloves. We were piercing with our bare hands. So we went to disposable, we started wearing gloves. I found a source for needles without the hubs. Unfortunately, needles that are made for injection are not ideal for piercing, but they were what we had access to. It wasn't until much later, towards the end of the 1990s, that some enterprising people came out with extra sharp needles. And you do not know how blessed you are and how fortunate you are that those are available. But the original was my design. I also claim that I invented the needle receiving tube to use for the Prince Albert piercing in particular. Up until that time, I was doing Prince Alberts the way Doug had taught me, using a wooden Q-tip, putting it into the urethra and piercing into the end of the Q-tip. It's not easy. I got very good at it, and I had no reason to change until it came time to teach somebody else how to do it. And it did not go well, let's put it that way. So I'm out driving one day, and it just, why don't I use a tube, stick it in the urethra, and pierce into it? I went back and called my favorite jeweler, said, Pete, would you make me this tube about 4 inches long, maybe a quarter of an inch? Smooth it out nicely, and I took it back to the studio and sterilized it, and my next Prince Albert was a piece of cake. And you are the benefactors. Yeah. Also, I personally claim the invention of the septum forceps. In Doug's original piercing kit were these weird-ass forceps. I have no idea what they were. That they just had these two ends, these claws that come together, they're pointed and they kind of overlap. And I could see no point. You couldn't really pierce with them because they're offset. So, at any rate, they'd hung around for years. They were just there. And I'm sure some of you, if not all of you, know what a pain in the ass septum piercings can be. They're hard as hell sometimes to get straight. So I had the inspiration of trying to make this forceps and see if it would make things better. So I took this crazy ass pair of forceps to my jeweler Pete, and I said, solder, showed him, drew a picture, solder some tubing on the ends like this, which he did, and lo and behold, we have septum forceps. Some people love them, some people can't stand them, but whatever works. If freehand works better for you, go for it. But at least it's an alternative, and it's one of my innovations. So there are samples in here of many of these things. I encourage you to take a look. There's some jewelry designs. There actually is this septum tusk I made for my own septum piercing. It was these little horns, little half tusks, you could buy as curios. These happen to be ivory. This was before the ivory ban. And they have a little gold connector that's threaded. After the ivory ban, you could still buy them, but they were made out of bone. And we offered bone tusks of this sort for some time. And that was before people began to stretch their septum piercings. Wanted to keep them small. My metaphysical interest, I joined a coven in the 1990s, and well, actually before that, 1980s. And this was a pentagram pendant that I made for myself of silver and gold. So, any questions?
Who was your first apprentice at the Gauntlet?
Who what?
Who was the first apprentice?
My first apprentice. Oh, that's hard to say. Trying to remember. There's a guy who worked for me. I don't remember whether it was George or Joe or Brad. I've lost track. It's been too many years, but they all date back. All right. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to have rushed you through, but I wanted to at least hit some of the high spots.
Jim, was there a moment in this whole history that you felt like was your high point, or the golden age for you?
My golden age was really in the 70s, before AIDS, and it was the golden age, I think, for a lot of gay men. AIDS just decimated the community. So many men died, not just men, but a lot of gay men died. It was a heartbreaking era. So I consider my golden age the 70s. It was kind of that wave that it started with women's lib and gay lib and Stonewall. Stonewall was in 1969. And it was just a feeling of so much freedom. And I felt a lot of freedom with what I was doing, you know. It was a whole world ahead of me. So that's my golden age.
I think of COVID as being the pandemic, but really AIDS has killed probably as many or more people than COVID.
I don't know if you've ever seen There's a photo that sometimes surfaces of the quilts that were, a lot of people, you may be familiar with this, the AIDS quilts. When someone died, a friend would make a quilt of a particular size. And these were collected and sewn together, and there are photographs of a protest in front of the Washington Monument with the quilt. This huge patchwork of quilts out in front of the Washington Monument. And there are thousands of them. It's just, it's heartbreaking when you think about it.